more teams in major college football in the Power Five with undefeated records: Alabama, Georgia, Wisconsin, and Miami, and that's it. And so I would think that Miami, not that anybody wants to lose this game, but they can and win the ACC, especially the path would be defeating Clemson, and that's a marquee win. I would think that that would be clearly enough to get to the college football playoffs. I know you kind of don't want to go there, Cam. You typically look at the opponent ahead, and that's it. You've got that coach's mindset, but that seems to be a good enough resume for me to get the team into the playoffs. Now, I know you can't look at it in a silo, in a vacuum, because you got to know what's going on elsewhere, because we could have a line of one-loss teams, and the job of the playoff selection committee could be fierce to try to sort that out.
Yeah, and that's true. I think that the playoff conversation is a thing that, we're going to have now, because Miami has won enough games to earn a right to talk about these kind of things. Even though I do try to be a little bit more focused on, the week ahead, it's fun a little bit to look ahead and, into the couple weeks, months ahead, and say, hey, if we do what needs to be done, then the proper reward can be there. It'll be interesting to see if we take the hypothetical of Miami losing. It will be interesting to see what happens with the committee, because the arguments that the committee is using for ranking teams highly, they're using the same argument in the same way to then rank Miami lower than I think they should be. So if you're talking strength of schedule, you talk about Alabama having a strength of schedule. They don't have strength of schedule. They have the name Alabama as the brand. But then you talk about Miami not having strength of schedule, when every metric has Miami demonstrably better on strength of schedule than Alabama. You're talking out of the side of your neck. Like, you're talking out of both sides of your face, because it's the exact same metric and you're using it in two different ways, one to support somebody else and then deride Miami. And it will be interesting to see, if Miami were to lose, how that works relative to losses, because I tweeted it out during the college football playoff show yesterday, but Herb Street said not to get caught up in wins and losses, not the win-loss record, as though winning is not the point of the game. Otherwise, we would be talking about teams like Florida or Florida State or other teams that have less than, 500 records. Those guys are 3-5 because they're trash. But we're not talking about them in terms of the college football playoff, because wins and losses matter. And they matter for everybody except for Miami. And it's interesting. So if Miami were to lose to Notre Dame, that would be the best loss of anybody other than Notre Dame's loss to Georgia at current. That should be, Clemson lost to a team that has 5 losses right now that might not even make a bowl game in Syracuse. But that's a great loss, and everything. That's a better, if Miami loses to Notre Dame, that's a better loss than them. That's a better loss than, who else is a one-loss team up there? Whoever it is, except for Notre Dame, that's the best one-loss loss out there. But it won't be looked at like that because it's Miami. That's going to say, okay, Miami's trash and everything, and they're just going to drop like a rock.
I got you, Cam. Washington is only 2 spots behind Miami, and they have a loss already. It's against Arizona State, and we could argue all night about Washington's best win, but it doesn't matter what the argument is, because it's awful. Their best win is either Oregon or UCLA or Rutgers.
Yeah, UCLA, they're getting a little bit better and everything, but when they played, it wasn't anything marquee. Exactly. So you have these teams that have one loss, and everybody's talking about, oh, this is a great loss and this is a fantastic loss. Miami doesn't have any losses. But you're then trying to say, okay, when we're talking about Miami, don't get caught up in the wins and losses. And then if Miami were to lose, we're going to say, okay, well, the losses matter and the wins don't. And it's just, there's such duplicity going on in the conversation. And I think that's really where the point of contention for Miami is and will be, especially if there's a loss on the record. If there's not a loss on the record, that's pretty much, I think, the only way that Miami is going to get into the playoff, honestly. Or maybe a loss to Clemson or something like that, a one-loss Clemson team in the ACC championship game. Just because people have, instead of looking for ways to be positive about Miami, about saying, okay, this team has found ways to win and things like that, which for every other team in the past of college football, we're talking about, oh, they have championship caliber and they have stick-to-itiveness and they're gritty and they're strong and they, never quit. For Miami, it's, oh, well, they played a bad team close. Okay, cool. Clemson played a bad team close and lost, but we're not going to talk about that. It's just, these kind of things, that's really where my point of contention is. And I think a lot of my Canes fans family shared that kind of thought with me. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But hopefully Miami wins this week and the week after and the week after and the week after and gets to 11-0 and goes into the playoff without a loss. Because if that doesn't happen, I have the strong sensation, feeling, thought, premonition that Miami's going to get screwed.
So I'm pretty much right there with you, Cam. And I don't necessarily think Syracuse is a bad team. It depends on what you mean when you say good and bad. But I think they're a pretty decent team. I think they're a top 50 team in the country. The team that I watched beat Clemson and lose to Miami within one score. They were a capable football team. No, they're not great. Like you say, they may miss a bowl game, but they've had a tough schedule, and they're okay. And you're completely right with the Alabama analogy. The only difference I'll make, and this to me is the last criteria, is dominance of play. To me, it's more about, do you win your games? And then if you're winning your games, let's evaluate who you beat. And let's evaluate, if you lost a game, did you play an extremely difficult team and play them close, i.e. the Notre Dame Georgia situation where really good teams going at it, 20-19 game. Okay, you played somebody really good out of conference and you didn't quite get it done, but you showed that you can perform at that level. And then down beyond those metrics, to me, is how dominant were you? And that's the only separation I would make with Alabama Miami, would be that Alabama's been pretty much start to finish dominant against bad teams, but dominant. But other than that, yeah, you can't. Alabama being number one by most people's standards, I know they're number two in the rankings, versus their schedule, they haven't played a team probably as good as Virginia Tech.
Right, and that's where, again, it's just you're talking about two different things. Now, if the committee were to say Miami didn't win by enough, and we're talking about that dominance of play factor, true, I'm not going to say that Miami has been more dominant in a game or overall this season than Alabama. That's true. I have no problem with that. But when you start saying strength of schedule and quality losses and things like that, there is no conversation that can be had on the statistics of what has actually happened, where a lot of these teams are ranked ahead of Miami. Or I'll even remove myself from the situation. Wisconsin, because they're 9-0 and undefeated and going through the same thing that Miami is. Now, is their schedule also pillowy soft? Sure. But they still haven't lost a game. And, it's funny when you're talking about certain teams that you're saying, okay, all these points of conversation change. And the things where you could say, all right, Miami hasn't, or we would like it if they had won by more points. I would have liked it if they won by more points. You think I wanted to be there with my heart pounding in my chest, waiting until the last play, week after week after week after week? No, I want a 97-3 blowout, but that wasn't what happened. But Miami found a way to win. Same thing with Wisconsin. They're just going out and winning games. So if you were to say Miami didn't win by enough points, we want to see them dominate, I could live with that because that's the truth. But then when the committee comes out and says, and I hate the committee because Kirby Hocutt, Miami's former athletic director, is the chair of the committee, and he's a snake and a weasel, and I do not like him. But anyway, when you're coming out and saying things like strength of schedule and quality losses and some of these things where Miami's strength of schedule is stronger than most of the teams that are up at the top, Miami's quality losses don't exist because we haven't lost a game, those kind of things are what are frustrating. Not if they were to say, hey, we want a more dominant performance, or we want blah, blah, blah. Or honestly, let's be real. The ghost of Al Golden still lives in with the Miami name of the Miami Hurricanes right now. And we don't believe that they're really that they've come back to being a quality relevant team. We still think and have Al Golden PTSD, where this team is going to, all of a sudden fall apart and disintegrate. So until you get through more games where you haven't done that, we're not going to believe that. I could accept that as being true, but that's not what is being propped up by the committee, and that's where I have a problem.
It would be nice that in addition to stripping the logos off the helmets, they could strip the metrics down so much that the committee members couldn't identify what teams were being compared and then have a true evaluation of the teams. But of course, that's next to impossible. And yeah, for Wisconsin, I think the same holds true. They have some difficult games finally on their schedule, but they've done everything that they've been asked to do to date, and that's win all the games.